You're listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, nutrition, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere, anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your hosts, Dr. Justin Marchegiani and Barris Harvey, as they answer your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Hey there, this is Dr. Justin Marchegiani. Welcome back to Beyond Wellness Radio. Again, just a reminder for everyone, check out beyondwellnessradio.com. Click on the Contact Us button to ask us questions. You can actually speak your questions in, and we'll play them back on the show. You can also subscribe to get your content or the newest episodes of Beyond Wellness Radio emailed to you directly. Also, subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube. If you like the show, give us 5 stars. If not, give us some feedback. The show's here for the listeners. Again, you can always schedule a consult on beyondwellnessradio.com. Click on Just in Health, or you can click on Really Healthy Now and get in contact with Barris Harvey. Again, today this is a real treat. We have Dr. Frank Tortorice, my Italian brother from another mother. And today we're going to be talking about diabetes and functional medicine. And Dr. Frank went to med school over at the University of Rome over in Italy, and he did his residency and internship in Youngstown, Ohio. And it's really a privilege here to have Dr. Frank Tortorice on the show. Dr. Frank, how we doing?
Great, Justin. Nice talking with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Dr. Frank, how did you get to be known as the diabetes doc?
Well, we have some diabetes in my family. Many family members have diabetes, or enough have diabetes, type 1 and type 2. So became something personal to me. And then, when I finished my internal medicine residency and then added the functional medicine, it became clear that the standard way of treating diabetes doesn't always get a permanent solution. So the thought was that it was something I felt I could make some inroads into, and that I enjoyed, and that I could see people with diabetes all day and have some positive influence in their life and their health.
Awesome, Dr. Frank. Well, talk to me about diabetes type 1, type 2. What's type 1? What's type 2? How are they different? Can you touch on that?
Yes. Well, type 1 diabetes traditionally has been due to pancreatic failure, where the person can no longer produce enough insulin. Because they can no longer produce insulin, they can become very ill and have some conditions or even hospitalizations because of unregulated blood sugar. Type 2, which is the majority, used to be only in adults, but now we're seeing it in adolescents and even younger kids, is due to insulin resistance. The patient produces insulin, but the insulin they produce isn't enough to get their blood sugar back to their normal levels. They have insulin resistance, so the insulin doesn't really help, getting their blood sugars into the normal range.
Got it. So we have type 1, which is the autoimmune condition where your body's destroying those pancreatic cells. And then type 2 essentially is the receptor sites are just getting numb to all of the insulin from all the high blood sugar in our diet. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And in your practice, what are you seeing more of? Are you seeing more type 1 or type 2?
No, by great majority we see type 2, but then we also see type 2 that have to get on insulin because they've maxed out of oral medications, and they're put on injections of one type or another. So that's becoming something we've seen in the last 10 years that we never used to see. When they were type 2, you just increase the medications, the oral medications, and usually you get them back into a reasonable blood sugar. Now we're seeing that patients are on 3, 4, 5 oral medications is not doing it. Even though they produce insulin, they have so much resistance that they need additional insulin from injections to help regulate their blood sugar properly.
That makes a lot of sense. So they're coming into you, right? Their blood sugar is high. So like diabetes, for instance, that's like a blood sugar of 126 or greater. And we know that even over 100 potentially could be pre-diabetes. So can you tell me how you're diagnosing these people? And is there more functional tests you're using to pick them up before they're full-blown diabetes?
Yes, Justin. What we do is, if you go to Jack Kruse's book, he says that a blood sugar of 88 or above already shows insulin resistance. So we will check the standard, medical tests, laboratory tests that doctors get, such as a chem panel.
Right.
But we also add, even if they're not diabetic, I add a hemoglobin A1C, which is a 3-month measure of their average blood sugar. And you can get a lot of information with that. But the one piece I add to that some doctors don't add is the C-peptide or an insulin level. And by getting that, you see pretty much how much work the pancreas has to do to maintain a normal blood sugar if they're normal, or if it's abnormal, how much insulin they're secreting in their present condition.
I like that. So yeah, C-peptides, basically it's like a meter for how strong the pancreas is or how much insulin the pancreas is pumping out. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And with some of your type 1 diabetics, you'll probably see that C-peptide very low, if not at all, right?
Right. Yeah, usually I will manage them sometimes with a diabetic or an endocrinologist, and they'll get that and maybe a GAD 65, looking for antibodies for the autoimmune component, as you mentioned earlier. And if we know they're not going to produce insulin, it makes no sense to give them a medicine which is going to stimulate insulin production. They just don't have it. They have to be on insulin.
Got it. Yeah, and for all the listeners, what stimulates the GAD antibodies the most is going to be gluten. So if you got type 1 diabetes, getting off grains and gluten is going to be important.
That's correct. A lot of times, Justin, they'll come to me and they're not diabetic, but they're pre-diabetic.
Right.
And we can even reverse that condition. We've had a number of patients that were right on the cusp of being a diabetic, but through they're working their lifestyle, they're sleeping, their nutrition, getting rid of gluten, getting rid of processed foods, managing their stress better, doing a better job with sleep, getting regular exercise, no matter what present state of activity they're at. It can make a world of difference for them.
All right, that's great. So if I'm, the average patient here and I'm going into my doctor and I got my blood test here right in front of me and I'm looking at it. So your basic CBC, we're going to have a fasting blood glucose. What's the number that you're looking at for potential prediabetes? Are you greater than 100, greater than 105? What's that cutoff?
Well, I mean, really, I don't want to see it above 88.
Really? Above 88?
Yeah, again, as I referenced earlier in Jack Kruse's book, he uses that 88, and I found that to be pretty true. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I mean, if you get an athlete or we have some athletes and some people who are high level, either in excellent physical conditioning, their blood sugars will be in the 70s even, and they're doing really well. Or even young people, when we check a lot of adolescents that of a normal body weight, or even young adults, their blood sugars can be in the, if they have no insulin resistance, their blood sugars will be in the 70s. Maybe 78, maybe 80, 82. They're rarely over 90. We just see 90 so often that we think it's normal, but it's really not.
Interesting.
So I know there's other experts that may disagree and say, oh, no, it's 100 is your marker. But again, I mean, do you want to, be 2/3 out of the in trouble before somebody does something about it? I mean, at 88, I think you can really start to make changes. I mean, obviously, if they're 95 or 100, you'll see that their A1C is probably in the mid-5s.
Right.
And according to Dr. David Perlmutter, once you start getting above 5.6, you're at risk for type 3 diabetes, which, to your listeners don't know, it's another, he believes that's the new, Alzheimer's, dementia is like a type 3 diabetes because of inflammatory changes in the brain.
Right, and you said 5.3. That's for the hemoglobin A1C,
5.6.
5.6. Okay, all right. So a couple of things here. I noticed, because I'm doing a lot of blood sugar testing in my office, and I do notice blood sugar, if you're using blood sugar as a marker, it tends to take about 10 years for someone with diabetes to really even show up. So blood sugar on a fasting CBC is going to be a very late stage indicator for diabetes. Would that be something you agree to, Frank?
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Okay. And my biggest concern is I see some patients with their blood sugar, in the 90s when they wake up fasting. And one thing I think that maybe isn't taken into account is the dawn phenomenon, which is cortisol potentially upregulating or mobilizing glucose. What's your take on the dawn phenomenon by the stimulation of glucose?
Well, I mean, you'd have to get like a 2 a.m. blood sugar. And I know that some doctors tell their patients the first week to prick their finger at 2 in the morning, but what I use as a surrogate marker is checking the C-peptide. If their C-peptide is chronically elevated, then you know that they have some insulin resistance. They're not getting the sugar into the cells. The body secretes more insulin to try to overcome that resistance. So I think that's a good way. The other thing is there's a phenomenon called the Metabolic Syndrome. And if they have overweight, if they have borderline or hypertensive numbers, if their cholesterol is either fractionated with the bad cholesterol or the total is elevated, all those different things, plus if they have central obesity, all those things are telling you that this is a person who is on the wrong path in terms of their blood sugar management. I mean, as you know, blood sugar is just one of the things we see. I mean, these patients come in, they have 3 or 4 comorbidities together because they really been not managing their health well, or because they've they have stressors in their life, and things have changed.
That makes sense. And one of the things that I do in my practice, and I want to get your take on it as well, is using a glucose tolerance test. So essentially taking your fasting blood sugar and then looking at 1 hour and 2 hour and getting a sense of where they're at. Because if you read Jenny Rule's book, Blood Sugar 101, she talks about at 1 hour in, you want to keep the blood sugar under 140. At 2 hours in, you want to keep it under 120. And then at 3 hours in, you want to be down to a fasting state. So what's your take on fasting glucose or a glucose tolerance test?
Yes, that's an excellent thing you're doing there, because we will do it well, because sometimes you'll get a C-peptide that's elevated, or you'll get a hemoglobin A1C. Like I had a patient today with her hemoglobin A1C was 5.9.
Right.
Which is pre-diabetic. 6.5, depending on what lab you're using, is actual diagnostic for diabetes mellitus. But his C-peptide is only 1.16, which is, we like to see it below 2 in our clinic. So the question is, why is this guy having so much resistance apparently with an A1C of 5.9, but not producing very much insulin at all? 1.16. I expect it to be 3, 4, 5. Sometimes you see it 8 or 9. So something's not right. So I says, you know what? We need to do a 2 or 3 hour fasting glucose tolerance test, because I got to figure out what's going on with your insulin and also get a C-peptide at all those 3 stages. And if you do that, then you see how it's kind of like I tell patients, if I want to see how you run a 100-meter dash, I could think about it and talk about it in the office, or we could have you just go down to the local park and just time you. Yeah. So the same thing with insulin. It's a functional type test where we stress the pancreas by giving a standardized load of 75 grams of sugar, and then we see how the patient performs.
That's great. That's great. And I just took my fasting blood sugar. I'm about an hour after a meal, and I'm at 118 right now, which is a little bit high for me. Typically, I never go above 110, but I had a little bit of plantains and squash after my meal. So yeah, the goal is, the research shows about 140 or higher at any time is going to create some level of inflammation and or advanced glycation end products. I want you to talk about some of the damage that happens with diabetes and blood sugar and some of these AGEs or advanced glycation end products, Dr. Frank.
Well, the problem with diabetes is not so much just the sugar, it's what it does to end organs. So end organs for diabetics are the eyes, the kidneys, the peripheral vascular system. It can cause fatty liver, which can lead to liver damage or even liver cancer, according to some reports. What we worry about is that the patient's cells and organs become affected by this sugar, which is very noxious and toxic to the body, and causes causes a lot of inflammatory changes, which lead to a lot of bad side effects to the individual organs. So what we see a lot of is in this population is kidney damage. We see patients that are on dialysis, hemodialysis 3 times a week as an end stage. But then we see that their filtration system starts to diminish, and the kidneys normally reabsorb most of the useful products of the blood and give it back to the system, and only the waste product goes into the urine, which gets discarded. But when you start having diabetes, it's like having a sieve, and you start losing valuable protein. And when you start getting above a certain level, then the kidneys are really no longer able to filter, and you can start getting either infections, or you can start getting damage by these products going back into the blood systems that aren't adequately gotten rid of by the body. So that's one thing. The second thing is the eyes, and we'll have sometimes that patients that haven't seen me in a while go for an eye exam because they can't see, and then the ophthalmologist says, "Wow, you have these these peripheral these proliferative damages to the back of the eye or the retina of the eye."
Hemorrhages, right?
Yeah, there could be that. There can be the vessels can be swollen. There can be increased pressure. Yeah, and they say you better see your doctor and have a blood sugar check. And they've caught 1 or 2 before I have, because either the patient hasn't seen me or they weren't complaining of anything, hadn't seen a doctor, had some change in vision, and the doctor looked at the back of his eye and said, these are some changes that are consistent with a new diagnosis of diabetes mellitus. So those are the two probably we see the most of, is the kidneys and the eyes.
Right. And so essentially what's happening here is we have these advanced glycation end products, and a good analogy is AGEs. That's the abbreviation, which kind of makes sense because it's aging you faster. And imagine what they're doing is they're just sugar coating all these proteins in your body, right? And these proteins are in the kidneys and the vasculature. And it's like basically taking a blowtorch to your creme brulee, if you will, and browning the creme brulee. That's what's happening to these arteries. And it's basically a free radical magnet. These free radicals come away and they just chip away at your electrons and your DNA, and they create damage. Is that something you would want to add to, Dr. Frank?
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. The proteins usually have structures which allow them to somewhat, they're somewhat mobile, and they usually are very flexible. Once you start getting glycated end products, you turn them very hard. So think of the difference between, like rigatoni that's raw and rigatoni that's cooked.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
I mean, yeah, if these proteins can't configure themselves properly, then a lot of bad things happen. So it's our bodies are supposed to be very flexible. Our arteries are supposed to be flexible. That's how we propagate the blood pressure. When they start getting hardened and you start getting plaque into them because of the inflammatory changes, because of the glycated end products, that's not good. So yes, Justin, you're absolutely right.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. So let's kind of recap for the listeners here some of the lab tests. So you're taking the fasting glucose 88, which that's very conservative. I like it 95, but 88, we're right there on the same level. So 88 fasting blood glucose. You like hemoglobin A1C 5.3 and below. Is that correct?
Depending on who you talk to, some people say above 5.5, you start getting changes. So, yeah, 5.3 is excellent. Sometimes I'll allow them to go as high as 5.5. It depends on the full picture, but yeah, I don't like to see it any higher than 5.5. I think you're starting to get a lot of some changes that shows that when you have even a little elevated sugar, what people don't understand is even without the diagnosis of diabetes, if your A1C is elevated, you have all the risks for diabetic end complications such as nephropathy or kidney damage, eye damage, liver damage. Right. And then the cardiovascular effects. So I tell people you don't have the diagnosis, but you're going to have all the complications. And they don't, they really don't get that, well, I'm okay. It's not 6.5, so I'm okay. I can do what I'm doing. No, you can't. You're starting to have inflammatory changes even at an A1C of 5.6.
Interesting. Now, one of the things that I've noticed, and I saw it in Jenny Rule's book, Blood Sugar 101, Chris Kressler also mentioned it too, is that as you start decreasing the inflammation in your diet and you start eating more low-toxin, anti-inflammatory, nutrient-dense foods, a la an autoimmune or paleo diet, relatively lower carbs, is your red blood cells start to live a little bit longer. And one of the things that I noticed in some of my patients is because the red blood cells are living longer, maybe past that 90-day window, is they have a longer lifespan to accumulate glucose. So that glycosylated hemoglobin on the A1C portion of the blood sugar there starts to have a little bit higher of a A1C marker, not because the person's eating more sugar, but because the red blood cell's hanging around longer and is able to accumulate it. What's your opinion on that? Have you noticed that at all?
I haven't really seen that to any tremendous degree. I will tell you, it really depends on what your patient population is. If you have, Olympic athletes and people, for whatever reason, are in excellent physical shape, probably you're going to see that. With most of my patients, they're working one or two jobs. They may be 25, 30, 35 pounds overweight. They're sleeping 5 hours a night. They're dealing with mortgages. Right. They're not people I would think that I think the stress is caused, again, remember we talked about the metabolic syndrome, that they have blood pressure issues, blood sugar issues, cholesterol issues, sleep issues. We're seeing a lot of that. We do have some quote unquote elite type patients, but I say for the most part, we take care of, just regular families and people that are just trying to make a living and do the best they can.
Got it. So the population that you have, that marker may mean more to you. I see it in my own. Like my marker for hemoglobin A1C is 5.7, and yet I don't eat any grains. I keep my carbohydrates around 75 grams of carbohydrates a day. I exercise. I'm not overweight. So I see that in myself, and I see it in some of my professional athletes that I see too. So, and I've heard Cresser talk about it and other people. So that makes sense. It probably has more value to you and the patient population that you're seeing or treating.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. You have to look at the patient as a whole. I mean,
right.
I mean, what I do and what you do, we don't do cookie cutter medicine. Each person's individualized, and we treat them as an individual. So yeah, I've seen some athlete type. We have a couple of athlete types that I've been seeing recently, and yeah, that's funny you mentioned their A1C is not the lowest. It is a little bit higher.
Yeah.
But then you look at all the other markers, their inflammatory markers, or their HSCRP or whatever marker you want to get, and they're consistently in the lowest tertile of the of the population.
I'm glad you're seeing that in your athletes' ranges. That's good. So let's touch back on some of the labs. So we mentioned the CBC, fasting blood glucose, hemoglobin A1C. Are you running a fasting insulin? You mentioned a C-peptide. Are you running a fasting insulin? And if you are, what levels do you like?
Yeah, sometimes we'll measure that, but not all the time. A lot of the patients we're seeing use their insurance for their labs. So sometimes if they don't have a diagnosis with diabetes, it can be a little of a problem. So, I mean, I'll go with the C-peptide, which I like to see 2 or below. Sometimes I'll get insulin. I think 7 or below is
that's what I like. I like 7 or below.
Yeah. But it depends. I mean, we have a whole range of patients, some with better insurance plans than others, and I kind of try to see what I can do for them to make it affordable yet take excellent care. I never compromise their care because of the lab. Yeah, I always the lab is first, their health is first, insurance is second, then fighting the insurance bills is probably third.
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem with most doctors these days is they have to justify what they're doing to the insurance, and the problem is insurance is more about saving money than getting the patient the answer. So I'm glad that you're not compromising that.
No, I think we have this discussion many times with our patients.
Yeah.
And I go to bat with them, and I fight for them in terms of talking to the insurance. I had one, for example, that they says, well, we're not paying for the gluten HLA genotypes.
Yep.
The person had Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Yeah.
So I had to write a letter and saying, you know what, there's a pretty strong correlation between this. I think you should really consider this. And then I didn't hear back from them. But, it's always things like that. But I think it's an honor to take care of these patients, and they come to you or me, and sometimes it's the last stop, and they've never had a doctor really cared about them, or they got that feeling. If the patient doesn't feel that the doctor really is going to go the extra mile for them, then it's hard for them. It's hard for me to say, take these vitamins or do these exercises or sleep this amount. I think it has to be a mutual trust, because a lot of times the relationship with your doctor is a very personal thing. And if you feel this person is a friend or a mentor or a coach, you're going to go the extra mile, and I think you'll get better health results.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. Very good. Well, you used a couple of terms here, Dr. Frank, metabolic syndrome. So I just wanted to touch upon that. Metabolic syndrome is this kind of sequelae of symptoms: high blood sugar, overweight, high blood pressure, maybe extra adipose tissue in the hip and waist area, increased inflammation. And it's kind of like a sequelae of all these things. And it's basically like probably the prime magnet for all chronic degenerative disease. Did you want to add to the whole metabolic syndrome concept you raised, Dr. Frank?
I think you touched on it very well, Justin. It's a terminology that's been used. It was used to be called Syndrome X.
Right.
I don't know if it was Gerald Reaven at Stanford who came up with it or whatever, but now we're seeing a lot more of it. The one thing I will say is years ago we never used to see this in kids. Now we're seeing it in kids, unfortunately. I think this is very grave for our population.
Yeah, I agree. So getting back to some of the lab work, just so everyone can write down their list of what they should be getting done, or if you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, going to look up Dr. Frank and having him run some of these labs for you. We got the C-peptide and or fasting insulin. We got your overall glucose, A1C. Are you looking at fructosamine at all, Dr. Frank?
Sometimes we do, but usually I don't. Usually I don't. I know some doctors get it. I know especially the diabetic doctors like that. If I want to like a snapshot of what they've been doing recently, sometimes I'll get a fructosamine, but I typically don't. I mean, I don't have a problem with somebody getting that test, but usually for what I'm trying to achieve, I really don't need to know, the latest minute-by-minute blood sugar with them. And I know that it's used with a correlation with some other markers, but in my practice, I haven't really relied on that as much as the other labs we've talked about.
And that's like a 30 to 40-day window of blood sugar, correct?
Yes. It's shorter term as opposed to a 90 to 100-day test as the hemoglobin A1C. I think sometimes the diabetic doctors get it because they've changed insulin and they don't want to wait around for another 6 weeks to figure out what's going on with the insulin, so they'll get it, and then they'll tell the patient, okay, you take more or less of some of these injectables.
Right. So one thing I'm seeing on a lot of patients, and I can't wait till they come out with blood sugar meters. I have one right here now that has blood sugar on it. I can't wait till they have one that actually has insulin, because one thing I'm seeing is people with relatively normal blood sugar, but I imagine if you ran your C-peptide, or in my practice, I'll run fasting insulin, it's through the roof. It's sitting at 19 or 20, or again, I think in your case you said above 2.0, I think, for the C-peptide. Is that correct?
Right, yeah. Usually I like to see it 2 or below. But I think, as you know, Justin, a lot of times the first thing that's going to be elevated is their postprandial
first thing.
The insulin levels, and then their C-peptides. So a lot of times what will happen is that even diabetics, they take their blood sugar only in the morning on an empty stomach, and they think, well, it must not be too bad, just a few points too high. I switched. I have them take it, within the first hour after a meal, and it's way over 200. I says, you know what? You're either eating the wrong food, or you're not, if you're on medicine, maybe the medicine's not working, or your diet isn't proper. So yeah, the first thing you'll see an elevation of the C-peptide or the insulin level, showing that the pancreas is either wearing out and not able to control the blood sugar with the amount of insulin it's secreting, or that, if you get a blood sugar right after a meal, within the first 60 minutes, it's sky high. So those are early warning signs that something is out of whack.
Yeah, because we know blood sugar is very inflammatory at high levels in the vasculature. We also know that high levels of insulin is very inflammatory, even with normal blood sugar. And I'm seeing this more and more as you get people that are able to keep their blood sugar in normal ranges, low 90s or even upper 80s in Dr. Frank's range, and we're seeing their insulin levels jacked up. And so talk to me about just are you seeing a lot of people with normal blood sugar yet insulin and C-peptide to the roof?
Normally, Justin, those people have elevation of blood sugar to some degree. There may be 99, 101, 106, okay, but then their C-peptide may be 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
Now, I try to, use an analogy with people. I say, it's like getting a loan. If you told me, I have a loan for $50,000, I says, yeah, but it makes a lot of difference if your interest rate is 3% or 28%.
Right.
And the same thing, if you're producing a little bit of insulin to get your blood sugar under control, that's one thing. If you're got the whole pancreas secreting everything it's got to keep it down, then it's a whole different story.
Oh, I like that analogy. I'm writing that one down. I'm gonna take that one if you don't mind, Dr. Frank.
Yeah, feel free.
I like that. Very good. All right, so we talked about some lab testing. I feel like everyone listening has some good markers that they can go out to their local doctor, or if they're in the Bay Area, to reach out to you and get those run. Now, most important out of anything I think we're talking about here when it comes to blood sugar and diabetes, and I think you'll agree with me, is diet. So can we talk about kind of what the standard of care is? And I know what you provide isn't going to be above and beyond the standard of care. So what the standard of care is and what you would recommend different than the standard of care.
Well, typically or historically, the standard of care was to tell patients to have a varied diet. They would get away from obvious things that most of us would figure is not good, like cakes, candies, crackers, things of that sort. But the typical ADA diet included, like whole grains and, even some other things that probably would not be in the best interest of our diabetic patients. I think a lot of times it just makes it worse. I even see what they do with patients who get referred from either other facilities or other doctors, and I read what the dietitian puts down there as their ADA diet, and it's I don't think it's helping these patients long term. What I try to say to them is listen, there's certain foods that we know historically or even scientifically cause the pancreas to have to secrete more insulin to help in the digestion and assimilation. And certainly processed grains are on the forefront of that. Absolutely. I mean, the more grains you have, despite all the toxins in the grains and some of the other issues with gluten, is the body, in order to digest these, has to requires insulin in order to get it into the cells. So if you're doing that and you're causing an inflamed gut response, then you're not going to get what you want in terms of health, because you're going to have elevated blood sugars eventually, because the pancreas is going to wear out because it just can't keep up with that.
I agree, and I see that all the time, and I'm seeing conventional registered dietitians still recommend 50 to 60 grams of carbohydrate for a lot of these patients, which we know is doing them a disservice. I know in the foreword of Dr. Diana Schwarzwein's book, The Schwarzwein Principle, and Dr. Schwarzwein was an endocrinologist for 25 years, and she made mention in the foreword of her book that the ADA diet causes diabetes. Can you touch upon that, Dr. Frank?
Right. Well, I think we're finding that some of the things that were recommended even as recently as 5 or 10 years ago may not be in the best interest of our patients.
Yeah.
And I think, healthcare in America is a extremely important part of our, gross national product in terms of expenditures.
Yep.
So there's a lot of people who are involved with that. What I will say is that patients come to me and come to you because they believe us, and what I try to do is give them something simple in terms of making dietary changes, and then have them see themselves the benefit and how they feel, how they look, and what they do with their blood sugars. The problem you have, I think, is patients throw their hands up. They say, no, I can't do all that at once. You're asking me to do too much, or, my wife cooks for me, my husband cooks for me. I don't want to disrupt the family. The kids are not going to go. So it's a process of inching forward, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of our patients. I mean, especially if you're talking about blue collar or families that have both husband and wife working. There's kids that are in school. I mean, we really have to do something that's sensitive to their individual needs. So either I'll talk to them, or if we have nutritionists to talk with them, they'll make sure that it's a functional nutritionist, and that we agree on what we're trying to do for these patients, and then we see them back, and then we try to have them have wins, Justin.
Yeah.
If they have wins, they have confidence. If they have confidence, they'll change. I mean, I've had people with diabetes. One gentleman I can think of, he came in at 255. Now he's about 197. And
wow.
This guy was just, you never know where the heart of a patient is, And I think we give each patient the full gamut and see who's going to step up to the plate, And this gentleman is pretty much just on the border now of being a diabetic, when before he was entrenched in a lot of medications. His he had hypertensive issues. There can be problems with, sexual function in both men and women because of diabetes, because it does a lot of bad things. So people have motivation to try to get this under control, and they have to really buy into why you're doing it. Not only, what they have to do, but why they have to do it. And I think that's why we have to spend more time with them and speak to them on their terms, on their language, but also give them small victories that accumulate,
I agree. That makes sense. So from like a dietary perspective, are you kind of starting out with a paleo template where you're cutting out grains? Are you primarily focusing on vegetables for carbohydrates? Are you allowing your patients any fruits at all? Could you go into that?
Yes. What we found is, I think maybe I had the mistake of just cutting too much out. I mean, you can go paleo where you don't allow any types of carbohydrates. And I think for a lot of our patients, yes, maybe it's better, but are they going to comply? So I talked to Paul Jaminet, who
Yep.
wrote The Perfect Health Diet, and we went back and forth, and he's a very nice, generous, brilliant man. And we talked about his concept of using rice and the same thing with potatoes. If you cook the rice and then you put it in the refrigerator and then you reheat it, the molecular structure changes, and it changes how the body, the glycemic response to it.
Yep.
And the same
starch.
thing. Yeah, and the same thing with white potato. That if you cook it, either if you put it in the oven or however you cook it, and then you put it in the refrigerator, then you take it back out again the next day and reheat it. Again, it's altered in a way that it causes less of a blood sugar surge. So what I try to do is, because remember, these are patients that have been eating pasta and pounding the bread, and I mean, you got to give them something that they're gonna go with, at least initially. I've seen sometimes after 3 to 6 months that the patient says, you know what, doc, I don't even want that anymore. But initially, if you just take too much away from these patients, they just either will not come back or they won't comply. They just, it's not a question of willpower. It's a question of either, I don't want to say food addiction, but it's a question where it's hard for them to buy in right off from the bat. So we give them a little bit of starch, but I don't give them an unlimited amount. We give them 1 or 2 portions of these, starchy carbohydrates, but pretty much everything else is off the table in terms of things that you would recognize as, starches or maxi carbohydrates.
Right.
We have them have a protein with every meal.
Smart. Yep. Stabilizing the blood sugar.
And then all the phytonutrients of vegetables, and some of the vegetables, if they're organic, are even better. We do let them have a limited amount of fruits. Some of the fruits have actually been shown to help with diabetic control. Some of the berries and some of the different. But it's limited, and again, the highest quality and the freshest quality is really important with that. So, and then we see where they are. They'll bring in their blood sugars. We'll check their weight. We'll check their blood pressure. We'll check their cholesterol, and then we just modify it. So if they've been overdoing it, we just cut back a little bit. If they're right on target, well, they can keep doing what they're doing. So we work with them in a very personalized way to try to be as responsive to them as possible, but yet to get them to goal. I mean, basically, they pay us to get them to their goal, which is to have, in the case of diabetes, either no more diabetes or at least no more symptoms from end organ damage of diabetes, depending on what stage of diabetes and how many years they've had it.
Right. Yeah, I used to work in surgery about 10, 15 years ago at a hospital nearby when I was in university. And my job was to go in with the surgeon, and I would assist in holding the limbs of the diabetic patients as they'd be amputated. And I'd have conversations with the surgeon afterwards, and the conversation was interesting because we'd be outside and he'd be smoking a cigarette a lot of times. And I'd be asking him, hey, doc, what can we do to get ahead of this and prevent all these organs or feet and toes and such from being cut off? And he really didn't have much to it. And I think, his perspective on him smoking a butt outside, kind of said it all. But hundreds of limbs had crossed through my possession down to the morgue. And it was really sad, I think, from your perspective and mine, knowing that that's all preventable. Can you talk about how much of this can be prevented and how many people, you're able to totally, from a laboratory assessment, cure them where they're off their meds and their blood sugars back under control?
Yes, Justin. So yeah, we think that, if they're early stage of either prediabetes or diabetes with no end organ damage, that they have an excellent chance of being able to live out a full life. I remember when I was in training, one of my diabetic teachers gave me this article, and the lady was like 97 years old, had diabetes since the time she was 18 and never suffered an end organ damage. So it can be done. It can be done. I mean, again, it's not so much the diagnosis of diabetes, it's all the complications you get from poorly controlled blood glucose. So what we do is each and every one of our patients gets those tests I mentioned, and then we take it from there. We've discovered a number of people that have just had no doubt diabetes that had hemoglobin A1Cs 7.1, 11.4, or whatever, and at that point there was no discussion not to get diabetes. They already had diabetes. What are we going to do about it so they don't suffer end organ damage and lose their limbs like you so eloquently mentioned, or go into kidney failure, become blind, or so on and so forth. So it's hard to say there's not a patient we can't help, except maybe somebody who is really, really end stage.
Right.
But if they come to me before that, then we usually are able to help them. I mean, I just got a new patient. He's had both his legs cut off, so I don't think help with that. But I think a lot of his inflammatory changes we can help in terms of, he's had a triple bypass and just one of those people who just doesn't have a tolerance for, if these were caused by diabetes, which he said they were, and I haven't received the records, but we can still help a lot of people. I mean, when in the end, it comes down to improving their quality of life.
And I think you'd already touched upon it, but I think the average person doesn't realize the fact that diabetes and blood sugar and inflammation are the number one predisposing factor for cancer and for heart disease because of the vascular changes and because of the fact that cancer cells love glucose. Can you touch upon the diabetes, cardiovascular, and cancer connection?
Yes. I think, early on we thought that it was cholesterol causing the heart disease.
Yeah.
But then later on with more sophisticated studies, we found it was oxidized cholesterol that caused problems. And then we found out that you didn't get high cholesterol from eating cholesterol. You got high cholesterol from eating too much sugar and having inflammatory changes in the endothelial and the vascular layers. So then became a no-brainer that, we needed to cut down this inflammatory change, which is at the root of almost everything that we see in terms of the major diseases of lifestyle, at least in the Western world and especially in the United States. So that's why myself and your practice as well is we really target on cutting down inflammatory, instigators in the patient's diet and their lifestyle and their sleep and their stress levels and so on and so forth.
I like that. It's very rare to find holistic medical doctors that really understand the aspects of sleep and exercise and nutrition. Even the more functional ones that are out there, they just want to use hormones and supplements to cover up other issues where, as you already said and you've alluded to, that you really can't replace exercise, you can't replace sleep, you can't replace stress management, you can't replace blood sugar stability between meals. So I think that's, quite an interesting perspective as a medical doctor to come to those conclusions. Can you talk about how you as an MD came to them? Because, you have 10, 15 years of indoctrination in one arena, which we know is great for acute and traumatic care, but the acute and traumatic model does not work too well with chronic disease. Can you touch upon how you came to where you're at now, Dr. Frank?
Sure, Justin. Yeah, so early on, back even like in year 2000, 2001, I was introduced to the Institute for Functional Medicine through some local seminars they gave. Then I went up to Gig Harbor in Washington and got some advanced training at the Institute for Functional Medicine. So when I heard these lectures and saw these doctors and heard what they were doing, it was really something I wanted to become more of a part of. It was really interesting. It was exciting. And it was what I believed in. Patients are sick not because they lack certain medicines, because especially, with chronic conditions of lifestyle changes or decisions they've made. And they may have read or saw an advertisement on TV or read a newspaper and thought they were doing the right thing. But many times we have to really re-educate them on what's in their best interest and how to become a critical reader and a critical, critic of what kind of information they're giving. To be a doctor to a certain extent is to really train or teach our patients, and that's why everybody on my staff helps the patient with their need to learn and to exchange. Sometimes the patients will teach me things. So it's a way that we're trying to really up the ante in terms of giving them cutting edge information, which we know will have a positive benefit on their health.
Great. I love that. And I actually remember seeing you. I think we talked about this last weekend. I remembered seeing you 2007 in Dr. Dan Kalish's office in San Francisco on Fillmore. And so even back then you were still learning, I was learning, and that was kind of my first interaction with you almost 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. It's gone on much more exciting since then with all the different changes with the iPhone apps and all the internet. It's a whole new world out there, but I think it's exciting. I think we're going to come up with a lot of patients that are going to be interested in pursuing their health through a partnership. With the functional medicine type of model, the patient and the doctor are like teammates. It's not, a condescending thing where somebody with a degree tells somebody who's coming there as a client how to do it. It's more like a team, and I think I enjoy it because I don't think I know everything about everything, and I think I learn a lot from a lot of my patients, and I enjoy using my, my background and my experience to help them get to where they need to be and get better. And the thing about our community, as you know, Justin, is, if I don't know something, I can call you or I can call somebody else and find out. And the people are very gracious to help us, and sometimes people will call me and want to know from me what's going on as well. If I can add something to some of the cases that they're working with. So it's pretty much a privilege to do what we do and to get up each day and try to make the world a little better place, even if it's one patient at a time. It really has a lot of meaning for us. And I think it has a lot of meaning for the patients. You become very close to a lot of them, I think, just because you share a common bond.
Yeah, I agree. I know last weekend we met up in Houston at a big functional medicine conference down there, and one of the keynote speakers was JJ Virgin, and she's got that book, New York Times best-selling book, The Sugar Impact Diet, which I think is very relevant to today's talk. And I think one key point she talked about in there was really the glycemic index, how maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be because of the fact that it really ignores fructose and the effects that fructose can have on insulin resistance. So can you just touch upon some of JJ's work regarding glycemic index and fructose and how it affects blood sugar and or insulin resistance, Dr. Frank?
Yes. Yeah, I read that book. It was really well done. I mean, she really put a lot of effort into that book, and I really want to applaud her for that. It was really a good job, and she makes it easy for patients who feel overwhelmed to get on board, and she holds her hand all the way through it. So I recommend that book as a good start with or without a functional doctor, but obviously better if you can get some personalized care with a functional doctor.
Absolutely.
The problem with fructose is just, as you know, the way it's metabolized and kind of the different way different effects it has on the liver and then on the body as a whole. So
right.
So, when they used to say, you probably hear this, eat all your fruits and vegetables, that's okay. Then it got changed to eat all the vegetables you want, but cut down on your fruit, which even if it's organic still has fructose and the negative effects of too much fructose in the diet. So you're right on about that. Is we really make sure that people think of fructose as like a high fructose corn syrup, but they don't realize that even too much. We have people that are like fruitarians, and they come in and they have a lot of negative health consequences. So you still have to put a level on or limit on the amount of fructose in the human diet, and even patients who think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I agree. So essentially, fructose doesn't really register very high on the glycemic index, and the glycemic index for everyone is just how fast glucose from the food actually gets into your blood sugar, right? So the faster glucose gets into your blood, then the faster or the higher the insulin spike is. So the thing with fructose for everyone is it doesn't have a high glycemic index, but it goes strictly to the liver primarily, which then can create insulin resistance at a systemic level. Is that correct? Because everything is filtering down from the liver?
Right, yes. It doesn't need to be metabolized and goes direct to the liver there. So it's the way the body metabolizes is much different than glucose. So that's the problem, and then there can be other problems, and then it can cause you to have more hunger. It can cause the cells to become stiffer as well. It has a lot of negative side effects, and that's especially if you're eating it in something that's been created like a processed food. Fructose is used as a common a sweetener to some degree, or even combination with. So yeah, we are really aware of the fact that we need to educate our patients to what to look out for in that regard.
I think that's really good. And one of the handouts I give to all my patients is by Dr. Johnson. You probably heard of him. He's the doc over in University of Colorado that talks about the correlation with uric acid and fructose and high blood pressure. Does he ring a bell?
Yes.
One of the handouts I give is his handout. Basically, anyone with insulin resistance or diabetes should not be consuming more than 15 grams of fructose a day, and that's 15 grams from whole food sources. So feel free. We'll put in the show notes his handout on fructose and uric acid just for the listeners so they can get a sense of what 15 grams of fructose is. And just so everyone knows, even something like an apple, an organic apple, regular red apple would have 10 grams of fructose, just to give people a perspective of what we're looking at. So Dr. Frank, I want to start ending my shows with people's or clinicians and physicians' perspective on what the biggest 3 things that you would recommend. It's kind of a little spoof off of Dave Asprey's ending of his podcast because I like the ending so well. What the biggest 3 suggestions to improve your health or our listeners' health, what would you recommend, Doc?
Well, I would say try to eat more natural foods that are not processed. If you can't read the label, or if it's kind of like what Jack LaLanne said, if man made it, don't eat it. If God made it, go ahead and eat it. So again, that's a little bit simplified because you can get into trouble a little bit. But I mean, if you're shopping around the periphery of the supermarket and having more fresh vegetables, limited amount of organic fruit, and then grass-fed protein, beef.
Great, and the patient shouldn't be afraid of fat, right? Healthy fat, right?
Chicken and the eggs and more natural. Yeah, healthy fats are very important. Yeah, don't be afraid of fat. It's not the fat that's the problem. It's the inflammatory sugars that are causing a lot of problems.
Love it. What's number 2?
Number 2 is it's important to get exercise on a regular basis. Even walking. If let's say you're a little bit more mature, a listener. Even walking is a wonderful exercise. Just make sure you do it regularly, and you don't have to necessarily go to the gym and lift weights, but start out wherever you are and get regular exercise. It has so many tremendous benefits that take a whole show just to go through all the different metabolic benefits as well as the psychological benefits from regular, consistent exercise.
That's great. Number 3?
Number 3 would be proper sleep. I think it's important that we think that, everybody in America is macho. We can get away with 3 hours of sleep and down, pound of coffee, and we can get through a day or maybe have 2 jobs. But really, from a physiological standpoint, we really need to have, depending on who you talk to, 7 hours, 8 hours, 8.5 hours. But suffice it to say that if you get close to 8 hours of good, restful sleep in a room that's quiet and dark and doesn't have a lot of the electrical, radiation in the room, it's going to make a big difference in your hormonal levels, which we didn't get a chance to talk about today. So I think those 3 to start, and then also having positive thoughts and doing things you love and trying to do something good for other people, and then having a network of friends that are positive and give you energy. Just basic things that we do that can make a big difference in our life.
Wow, that was great. We went over a lot of stuff, Dr. Frank, with the show. We appreciate you coming on, and I just want to make sure all the listeners know how to get a hold of you if they're in the Bay Area and they want to look you up as a patient. I think you also may do some Skype and phone calls as well for FuncMed patients abroad. Again, Dr. Frank's website is Tortorice, F as in Frank, TORTORICE, MD as in medicaldoctor.com. Dr. Frank's got a email newsletter that goes out from time to time. I think he's got an ebook coming out as well. Dr. Frank, where else can our listeners get a hold of you and find more about you and your practice and what you offer?
Probably at the diabesitydoc.com is a good place to start.
Can you spell that for us?
That's diabesity.doc.com.
Great. We'll put that in the show notes for everyone. Dr. Frank, it's been great having you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me, Justin. It was a pleasure.
Same here.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com/question. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.